Welcome back to another episode of the Valor Flight Crew Podcast, where we dive into the people, partnerships, and behind-the-scenes work that keep our HAMS operations running. Today, we are talking about a part of the mission that doesn't always get the spotlight, but absolutely deserves it. In this episode titled Maintaining the Mission, we are joined by Faith Ortega, an A&P mechanic with vast experience across general aviation and transitioning now into EMS aviation. Faith brings a unique perspective on what it takes to keep aircraft safe, mission ready, and in the air, especially in high-pressure environments where time matters to our patients. We'll get into everything from preventative maintenance and emergency repairs to the communication dynamics between mechanics, pilots, and med crews. Faith also shares what it's like to teach mechanics transitioning from the military to civilian aviation, also mentoring this next generation of maintainers, and how evolving technology is shaping the future of this field. So whether you're in the air, on the ground, or somewhere in between, this episode is for anyone who knows that every mission starts with an aircraft that is well maintained. So let's dive in. The Valor Flight Crew Podcast would like to take a moment to thank our sponsors, Airbus, Metro Aviation.
Welcome to the Valor Flight Crew Podcast. Brought to you by Vertical Helicasts and Vertical Valor Magazine. Produced in partnership with Echo, Every Coast Helicopter Operations. The Valor Flight Crew Podcast promotes the personnel and life-saving equipment behind helicopter air ambulance services. Join hosts Mike Fideli and Blake Schreider for in-depth interviews and expert insights from air medical personnel, pilots, communication specialists, and maintenance crews who play critical roles in airborne emergency response.
Line 1 accepting.
Copy, Line 1, gotcha, accepting. You're going to be talking to Red Feather 1 on LCEMS.
There's been times where I'm out of town and then I'm like, we don't have a part. And then this is the last company I worked for. And we'd be like, wait, there's a helicopter tourism place down the street. And they, on their profile picture, have a Bell 407. And I'm like, hey, you don't know me from Adam, but do you have 4 quarts of this special kind of oil? And they're like, we do. And I'm like, name your price. Can I come pick it up? And they're like, sure. And I'm like, we've done that in a pinch before. And they're like, okay.
Nice.
And then if we're like, if you ever need anything, like we're right down the street and we have some things. So, humor us if you need something.
But I feel like that's becoming, more common within the industry as these fleets are aging across the country, right? Like, I mean, I look at where I'm flying at, and I think our oldest aircraft that we have was originally assembled in 1988. You'd never know it because of how amazingly our maintainers, keep that aircraft looking like brand new. But it's obviously a pretty real issue for a lot of companies out there as these aircraft are continuing to age more and more, and getting parts for these aircraft becomes more and more difficult across not just the country, but across the world at some point. The companies are all evolving and they're not making certain aircraft anymore. And of course, that always happens to be the one that you end up flying. And so now you can't get the parts that you need. Are you starting to see that as a frustration when you talk to other maintainers out there? Are these a lot of things that they're feeling, pressure on to be able to, keep these aircraft up and running with less and less availability?
Yeah, I feel like a lot of us have conversations amongst ourselves, like where we see the industry going, or some of the operators that are choosing to use the older airframes. So my company, I remember when I first started just a handful of years ago, I asked that question. I said, hey, our aircraft is still supported, but I also don't think that people thought that they were going to be around this long. I think a lot of people thought that the shift would be made a lot sooner, but they're tried and true. And so they fit our operation well, and the price point's there. And so a lot of people really love flying them. I asked that question. I said, hey, are we eventually going to make a shift? And are we going to start phasing those older ones out? And the answer a couple of years ago was, oh, no, these have been around for this many years. They'll continue to be. It's always going to be that way. These things are awesome until we're kind of like forced to or strong-armed. And now if you ask that same question, only a handful of years later, I think the realization's starting to set in and people are like, yeah, it's not going to be a quick process, but eventually we need to start looking at logistically what we need to do to, get rid of some of the higher time ones and get in this different make and model, still the same manufacturer, A lot of the same connections are still going to be there when it comes to parts and support and, all that good stuff, engineering. But, we got to get with the program or evolve and adapt. So I'm happy to see it, though, because the older ships, they still do well. They still perform well, but the market's also changing and growing. And some of the capabilities and the safety features that the newer makes and models of helicopters have, it just makes so much more sense. So I would say the Bell 206 is just like a Chevy pickup truck that'll never die. Like if you take care of it, it's been in the family and passed down forever, and it'll just live and live and live and live. And it's just, like I said, tried and true. But it is nice to have all the bells and whistles and the newer products that are coming down and off the line. So
I think we're seeing a lot of, as technology is advancing and there's so many advances in safety, but also that we talked about this on a previous podcast. As med crews, as medicine is changing, we are cramming more and more stuff in the aircraft, more pieces of equipment, heavier pieces of equipment, and even more crew, depending on where you're at. And, so we're starting to see people questing for, all right, we need this kind of air. We've been doing this for a while, but we're seeing an uptick in these type of patients and these type of missions that are occurring. So we really got to look at how can we be equitable for the future, but also meeting our patients' needs, right? So we are in the EMS world. So it's kind of that little struggle balance, right? Like the technology is not cheap, aircraft parts aren't cheap. So, but it is really what I'm seeing, at least on my end, is really seeing that balance of, can we keep up with medicine? Can we keep up with technology? And can we also keep up not only the upfront cost of the aircraft, because that's one thing, but it's also the maintenance. And then also having the maintainers, you guys and gals that can keep up and maintenance these aircraft, right? So especially for this new technology, I don't know what that looks like. So for you guys, if it's new technology, you guys have to learn it. You have to learn the processes. You have to be trained on it. So it's not, I don't think it's as easy. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I just don't think it's as easy as, hey, here's a new aircraft and you drop it in your shop and you're at your base and you're ready to go. Like there has to be, I would assume, that type of plan moving forward to maintain that aircraft.
Yep. So that's actually the department that I'm now in. So I was a base mechanic and now I'm actually in the maintenance training department. So that's actually like the bread and butter of my job now. So when I get people that have never worked on a make and model, I get them spooled up, hopefully, on what I have training aid wise, which for the majority where I work, it's 206 stuff, but we're looking at, doing other types of training events for the 407s, the EC-130s, 135s, the different ships, makes and models, because even though a Bell 407 and a Bell 206 have a lot of similarities in the manuals and the consumables and the way that they're maintained and the schedules, they're not the same ship. And, all of the bells and whistles that come with some of the newer 407s, it's way different. That's been a big thing we've been hitting home lately, is getting those people the correct training and staying up to date on their training. So that's something else that we do at our company is once a year, we bring all of the mechanics back to HQ for a week, and we go into, further training that they may not be doing all the time. So, doing some solder work, doing some overhaul work, just doing some things that you may not see on a day-to-day at the base, but it keeps them sharp on their skills. Just from talking with my med crew, it sounds like you guys have something kind of similar. I think they always call it grand rounds or something like that. But it's like where they basically do like a training to make sure that you guys are sharp on your skills and you know what to do in certain situations.
Yeah, I think every company, they all have their own name or acronym to it. But yeah, I know we yearly go to a regional training center and we do nothing but patient simulations, scenario based, type stuff yearly. So I think that's great that you guys do that. That's really amazing to hear.
And I'm sure it builds a lot of good camaraderie for all of you that are coming back to HQ and going through that, not just the experience together, but, you get to talk about and find out, who's your guy or gal that's a Sparky, and who's your guy or gal that is good with X, Y, or Z, that who to call in those situations when you do get into that as a base mechanic, right? And it kind of builds that camaraderie amongst the entire company.
Oh yeah, they love it because we'll talk about, special tooling that's come out, or, oh, do you have this in your toolbox? You got to get one of these, or, oh, like I got this tech rep's phone number, like not an email, like a phone number, and you can call the guy. And so, when I see those guys, we call it recurrent, but when I see those guys at recurrent classes, just them being able to talk with each other and see each other, and they're all from different parts of the country. So I think we have over 200 mechanics, but who they pick and pull to come to recurrent are always from different regions. So that way they're not picking too many people from one place.
Yeah.
So they're like, oh yeah, I had you in an email like a year ago and you sent me this part or whatever. Like, sorry, dude, you had to give that to the courier at 2 a.m. or whatever. Like, it's just funny sometimes how it plays out and they all end up back at the same place. But yeah, it's as things progress and technology advances, we definitely have to stay on top of our training and our skill set, because these helicopters are evolving and they can do so much more now than they ever could, which is good because usually it's safety features, but that means usually the more circuitry that's involved means a little bit more troubleshooting, and that's why Faith needs to be a better Sparky, but we're working on it.
Baby steps, right? Baby steps. You'll get there. I find that extremely interesting. And I think, a lot of people don't necessarily understand all that goes into the advancement of those aircraft. And like you had kind of talked about before, that point of, when a company decides to make that transition from one airframe to another, it's not just about, like you said, plopping that helicopter there and expecting everything to work. I mean, not just the mechanics having to go through and get certified on that particular aircraft, but then just all of the parts and pieces and setup of the tools and how you need to have things, where you need to have things located to be able to appropriately maintain that aircraft. Like, there is a huge investment that goes into a lot of these companies to be able to make the changes for some of those aircraft. And so I think it's interesting to see how that's evolving across the country. And that's one of the things that we've kind of been struggling with at the organization that I fly with, is that, when it comes time for us to make that transition, what do we make that transition to? Because especially if it's something that is going from one particular make to another that is completely different company, that's a huge transition for a lot of people and a lot of parts.
Yep. And your mechanics are used to what they're used to. And
now
it's like working on Fords your whole life, and then someone pulls in with a Chevy and you're like,
exactly.
And some of those mechanics see it that way. And they're like, why are we deviating from what we know? And some embrace it, most do not. So it just depends.
We're the same way. We don't like change either. We like our routine, we like our habits, so we're like, why are we doing this? Why are we changing? Unless it's like the newest, latest, greatest, then it requires that change. Then sometimes we're like, oh, okay, yeah, I'll definitely want that ventilator. But no, I think we all like our habits, our usuals.
You're talking about equipment. That's another thing I had to get used to, is all the stuff that you guys have on board, because all the other operations I've ever flown, they didn't have any of that stuff in the back seat.
Yep.
So when I went through my initial training, they were like, oh, this is a Bell 206. And I'm like, well, yeah, like I worked on these. I get it. It looks good. Like it wasn't loaded down yet. And so then I got to my base and they're like, this is your 206. And I was like, oh my God. I'm like, you guys fill it to the gills. I'm like, holy crap.
Yes, we do. And that was kind of where I wanted to take the next part of the conversation with you, is I feel like, there's this, like we talked about before, this big gap between, our maintainers and our med crew and what each of us understand about each other's world. And, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the things that we like to have accessible or available to us, especially within the aircraft, oftentimes requires approval or finagling of or movement around by the maintainer that may be at that particular base. And I am extremely grateful that you guys are usually more than willing to do whatever we need to do, or you're also good at telling us, that can't happen now, but we'll look into it when we take it out for T inspection, or it's got to go through X, Y, and Z approvals. Can you kind of talk about what the importance of some of that is with where we have some of those things located within the aircraft, as to how that may affect the overall performance of those aircraft?
I have to say, when I went through my initial training, they really hit home on you're an aircraft mechanic, right? So you're going to take care of the helicopter in its entirety. Some of the things that are affixed or fastened to the aircraft are considered carry-on. And so that was one of the biggest reasons when I got to EMS, I was like, man, like I'm going to have to go through all this training because I don't know why, but in my brain, I thought, okay, if it's attached to the helicopter, I'm responsible for it. So I thought I was going to have to learn how to do all this stuff with your guys' monitors and all the different systems in there. And I was like, oh my God, it was like really daunting because I'm like, the aircraft in itself is a chore. I can't imagine like understanding all of this stuff in the back. And they're like, oh, no. Like, they showed me all the quick disconnects. So you basically just, push a button and it'll release and maybe you have to unhook a couple cords and then that's carry on. So I was really relieved to see how much of it comes out of the aircraft and isn't like fixed on it, like permanent stuff. So, but yeah, learning how to take things out correctly, how to handle your guys' equipment, where to put it. Also wearing gloves when doing so because there's so many little nooks and crannies and all the places because I was pretty ballsy the first couple times and I was like, oh, like we're and taking stuff out.
No, you weren't. No one warned you about that.
Well, they mentioned it and like I've seen a couple of the other mechanics that I was like, they're not really on a probation, but those people will come and assist you the first couple times.
Sure.
And that guy was like, yep. And he'd been doing it for like, as long as I've been alive. I'm just kind of mirroring him. And then, we pull some stuff and I'm like, okay, yeah, I need to wear gloves, which they do a great job of cleaning because sometimes you guys clean and you can't even see that there's stuff underlying between panels and sandwich surfaces. But yeah, like trying to remove everything carefully and how we're supposed to. And I usually would go get a crew member and be like, hey guys, I'm going to take this stuff out, but I don't want to run the risk of like damaging anything because I'm handling it improperly. So I had them show me how to offload the helicopter. And then anytime we had to reload it, I always went and got them after that because the last thing I would ever want to do is put something where you guys can't find it or maybe put it in the baggage when it needs to be in the back seat or vice versa. Because some of the bags, to me, they look very similar, but like, no, that's a go bag 1, that's go bag 4 or whatever. And I'm like, I would hate to put something in the wrong place. And that would be so sad if like a patient couldn't get that care they needed because I shoved some stuff in the wrong place. So
I think we have our own, like, I feel that one because just how much stuff, gets placed in there. But when you were saying like, what is considered like carry-on, right? So it has a mount that is affixed to the aircraft, but once that piece of equipment, like the ventilator is affixed to the aircraft, but it's secured in the mount, right? I know just when things go kind of south in the aircraft sometimes and things kind of get into places, I can only imagine what you guys have, like for example, I think just even the seats is one thing, not hard to take out, I guess, for at least our aircraft. But I try to get as much as what I can see. But I was very amazed at one time when our mechanic actually removed the seat and then just kind of under it, you could see where it had kind of gone down into the track. He's like, oh, well, let me just pop this screw out. And then it pulls up this track and you're like, oh, didn't know all that was there. So I, hats off to you. Again, I try to do good cleaning, Mike. I don't know about you.
Certainly try to. But I mean, we have the same issues with our litter bases or, the floor is not all one solid piece. So if something's going to find its way down in there, it's obviously going to be blood or all of the unmentioned moles that happen from our patients. So I try to keep the patients wrapped up as good as possibly can. But I mean, there's always surprises that our mechanics find throughout the process. And I feel for them in that moment. That's for sure.
And like the seatbelt straps, like on the stretcher, like are probably the biggest glove etiquette probably for you guys.
I got to give it to you guys too, because there have been times where, I'll see them come back. And like I said, there's a reason why I'm a mechanic and I'm not a nurse or in the medical field. And it's because I don't do well with that kind of stuff. I've been working before and just kind of hanging out and they'll come back and we call it a decontamination, but they're taking the seats out and they're just like having a conversation amongst themselves. And like, I could see the severity of like what they're cleaning and like how much there is. And they're like, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, anyway, oh, Faith, we made biscuits and gravy. Are you hungry later? And I'm like, I'm trying not to toss my cookies because I'm like, oh my God. And they're like so nonchalant. And then, you know, I hear them talking back and forth. And I will say it's also really cool to hear, or like, I'm a part of the team, and it's cool to hear what the helicopter that I'm maintaining does for people. You know what I mean? Just the severity of the calls and the different things you guys are doing. Because for me, it's a machine, but for you guys, it's a tool. And so you guys use that tool to get those people, obviously, the care and the critical care level that they need. But yeah, all the stuff that you guys have in there is so foreign to me, you know, and they're like, oh, like they're doing counts. I think you guys probably do that where you like recount the bag and weigh everything. And the 206, they do it so often because they're always pushing the margin of the gross max weight. And they're like, oh, we shed 4 pounds off the helicopter. And I'm like, yay. I'm like, I don't know. Not a lot, you know? And they're like, yeah, because we're pushing the envelope. And I'm like, that's crazy. But
yeah, but that hefty burrito that all of the crew members had for lunch, just put those 4 pounds back on.
That biscuits and gravy, put that right back on. Absolutely. But I mean, when it comes to weight restrictions, I can just imagine for you guys, like how when we like as med crews, we have to be responsible enough to. We can't be pack mules, right? Like, so, I mean, and we are, but like we can't plan for.
Are you sure about that?
We can, but we can't plan for every what if, right? And I've been saying this for a long time because I always find it funny, the things that when I'm on my ground hitch for a couple of weeks and I come back, it's always interesting to find the more stuff that accumulates, you know? So when we do go to do these weights, right? Or so when we go to look at these bags, like I'll just pick it up and I'll be like, man, why is this so heavy? And it's like, oh, there's 2 bags of fluid in there. And you're like, dude, like, why? Like, where? So like, I think for med crews, for us to realize that for you guys as maintainers, especially when it comes to weight and balance and where things need to go, I think we need to be honest with how these bags are configured. Or if we do have a change in the bag, like you guys should absolutely be included in that loop because it can definitely make a difference, right? Especially if you said, you know, for, these aircraft that you're right to that max gross weight. Like I don't think as med crews, sometimes we realize that extra bag of fluid or a couple of these extra things, right, where that can make or break some of these things for the performance of the aircraft. So I think that we should be very prudent in telling you guys, and including maintenance and at least the upkeep of the bag. Like, here's what's in it. This is how much it weighs, at least, you know, and if we have to make a change, like let you guys know. Like, does that help?
Thanks to our sponsor, Airbus. Airbus provides the most efficient helicopter solutions to its customers who serve, protect, and save lives and safely carry passengers in demanding environments. Its civil and military helicopters are flying all over the world, making missions possible. Visit airbus.com for more information.
I feel like it actually, so the resultant could be something that would be maintenance related, but for the pilot, it's always really crucial. And that's something that I'm going through flight training myself. And I feel like it gives me a little bit more empathy towards when something happens and a pilot has caused something or some underlying issue. The one that's really popular, you hear a lot about, are over temps or over torques. So if someone has over torqued the helicopter, a lot of the different makes and models that are used in EMS, it's a lot easier to torque out than temp out. So basically, what they'll do is they pull up on the collective and they're taking too much of a bite and they're needing more and more power. And so it can actually cause problems in the rotables or the different drivetrain segments and pieces. But when you're heavy, you're much more likely to have an over torque issue. And so over torque maintenance is usually pretty in depth or in detail, depending on how severe the over torque situation was. But that's one thing, as I'm going through my own flight training, that now I see how easy it can be if you're always pushing the max gross, like, you know, how easy it would be to do that. So I always kind of give them some grace when it happens now, because I'm like, yeah, it's when you're pushing the margins like that, it's very easy to do. But for us maintenance people, it's just another day, it's just the helicopter encountered something. We have to check and make sure it's still good to go, possibly remove and replace a couple of the piece parts, but depending on the severity. Like I said, I would listen to my pilots do their briefs, and I'm listening to like the patient weight and, that they can take, that's the max for the day, or what they each weigh, and the bags and all the different things. And I'm thinking it's a hot day and that makes a difference. So I'm like, I know I fly my little helicopter and I'm always so worried about doing it. And then they're like, oh, just throw another 15 pounds on. And they're like probably riding the needle the whole time. And I'm like, that's just crazy. I'm like, just one little bump and it wouldn't hurt you guys any or anything on board. But now we have to do all these inspections because it went up just a little bit too high. So, but yeah, when they're pushing the envelope like that, it's really easy to do.
So I think like thinking through a lot of that stuff, how can we as med crews and maintainers and pilots really work better together to ensure some of these operations are safer and that we don't encounter maybe some of the issues that we encounter along the way? Like, how can we better work together to ensure safety as a crew? Because, like Blake mentioned before, I think, you guys are oftentimes the unsung heroes or the forgotten part of the crew because you're not out there on the flight itself, but you're probably one of the most, if not the most important person or part of that crew to begin with. We would not have a helicopter to go and do what we need to do if it was not for all of you. And so like, how can we really, bridge that gap as a team to, help improve the overall safety margins within our agencies?
A lot of times I really feel like communication is key. You really see a team work well together when you have articulate people that can talk you through whatever it is that you're going through. My pilots, they're in aviation and they have a really good understanding of a lot of the capabilities and different things that the helicopter can do, while the mechanic, even though they can, fix the car, they're not trained to drive the car. So it's a really weird circumstance because sometimes I'm not understanding completely the operational limits that exist for them. And so sometimes, if they put that into perspective for me, or we talk through what it is they're experiencing or when they experience it, you're a lot more likely to not only understand each other, but be able to provide some perspective for them as to what that means for you on the maintenance side of the house. I found this even just with my crews, they're new a lot of times to aviation. And so when they're around a helicopter, a lot of times it's their very first time being in or around one. So sometimes my pilots will even, gripe or complain, and they're like, oh, they did this or they did that. And I'm like, yeah, but did anyone teach them or tell them, that, the door has to be opened this way, or that, that the seatbelts retract if you move very quickly and there's not anything wrong with the seatbelt, but the inertia reel is just actually doing its job. I know it seems rudimentary for us because we've been around it for so long. It seems like it's nothing, but if you don't have those conversations, how would they ever know? Something that I always hear and we always joke about is the most squawked thing are always doors. It always seems to be door jams, doors opening when they're not supposed to. It always seems to be the doors. But when I tell people, a lot of crew members, like I said, it's their first time being around a helicopter. So if it has a brand new paint job, they're like, that's a 2025, man. That's a brand new helicopter. And like, they don't, they have no idea. And it's not.
No idea.
And I'm like telling the pilot, and they're like, they were slamming the door. That's why it's broke. And I'm like, okay, but did anyone show them? Because these doors are kind of funky and they're old school. You got to open it to close it. Like, it's kind of goofy. And they're like, well, no. And I'm like, well, then you can't be mad at them because you were the new guy once too. And you probably jacked up a bunch of doors as well. Like, it's just different because you were 18 and, they're in their profession and they're in their 30s that you don't have as much. You're like, well, how do they not know that? And it's like, well, they've never been around it. You gotta say that. Yeah. So. But yeah, being articulate and communicative is definitely key. And I feel like those are the teams that do the best, and those are the maintenance crews that have a better grip on their helicopter as well, because they have those conversations about the equipment on board and what to expect. And if the crew, like we talked about earlier, if they're like, it's making a sound or a noise, I'm like, okay, describe it to me. Can we recreate it? Oh yeah, it does that when it's off. That's just this push-pull tube making a noise. You probably just never heard it because it's always moving when it's on and it's too loud. Just things like that. So yeah, I'm a pretty articulate person, and I try to be. And my crews, I'm really glad that they were, they reciprocated that back. And so I really love my crew. I always tell guys before they go to their base, I'm like, just be transparent. And if you don't know something, just tell them like, hey, I don't know, but we're going to figure it out together. Make sure you're good. I would never turn this thing loose without, getting in it myself. So.
Yeah, I think a lot of times we kind of joke around and say that the mechanics are often a difficult bunch to like break the barrier down and like have that open communication with them. And I feel like, so I've worked for a couple different air medical companies, and one of them had a system where it was there was a base specific mechanic for each of those individual bases, just because of how spread out things were. And then the agency that I work for right now, we're a little bit closer together. So the mechanics oftentimes share a lot of those responsibilities. But I feel like while it may have taken some time, it was worth its weight in gold to be able to have that relationship with the mechanic and be able to go up and, be like, hey, Johnny, or hey, Bobby, or, whatever it may be, and just have that open and honest conversation. I think that has really been a huge game changer, at least what I've seen within my own practice.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like I said, it just keeps that communication flow, right? So that way, like, we don't feel afraid to come to you because we know we're not going to be judged. I mean,
we're still going to be judged, as we should be,
right? But to the point of like, where we're coming from, because it's like either a genuine or honest, just like concern or question. Just it's big. Hey, heard this happen. Rip this door off. Really sorry about that, but like no, like just being able to make sure that everybody's approachable, and that there's no shame. And if you don't know, you don't know, and there's nothing wrong with that. And just being honest about that, like Mike, we're kind of in the same boat. We have like a base mechanic, but then they also will cover other bases when mechanics have their time off, which is definitely needed because of when you guys have to be on call like 24/7 for, a week, for whatever it is at a time. So just being able to have those good conversations with our mechanic, and then you guys can come to us and be like, hey, like, cause I've had it before where like, hey, there's something out there making a noise. And I normally hear it when you plug it in to charge, but this definitely sounds a little different. So I've always appreciated that, especially with our guy, Jared, shout out, like super awesome. He'll come in and just be like, hey, is this supposed to make that sound? And we're like, yeah, man, it's good. He's like, okay, cool. Like, so I really appreciate the two-way, street and communication really helps it, everybody be open and honest.
To ask, compare and contrast, like 91 and 135 again, do you feel like there is that closer relationship with your 135 partners and being able to have that relationship with your pilots and your med crew? Does that change? Like, I always felt like my mechanics had such ownership over that aircraft and felt such responsibility over that aircraft. And do you feel like having that relationship changes that at all in one way or another?
I feel like the camaraderie is very similar from 91 to 135. The mission is what's way different. So, that the helicopter is helping facilitate, a person's life being saved, versus we're taking people up for tours because they want to see the Grand Canyon. It's different in that regard. But when it comes to, my pilots or the other crew members that could be on board, it is still very similar. The only thing that really changes, I would say, for us is maybe how the maintenance or how the squawks are recorded or how they're taken care of. So that was one of the luxuries I had of the last company is they're like, hey, it's making this weird noise. And I'm like, all right, cool. Do you want to go take it up around the pattern real quick and we'll check that out? Sure. I would literally just jump in the front seat and we would go. And then someone would be like, oh, where's the helicopter at? And they're like, oh, Faith and, Billy are taking it around the pattern real quick to check something out. But like, now I look back and I'm like, oh my God, we didn't have to tell anybody we were doing that. We would just go do it. And like, I have to call 4 people. They have to get like my weight. They have to make sure everything's, which not that we weren't doing that or being safe, but there's a lot more boxes that have to be checked. And so a lot of other companies that are not EMS are a lot more cowboyish with how they do stuff. Not that it's wrong. They're still following all the rules, all the regs. But that's also, that's why a lot of people like that kind of work too, though. Like being if you're an airline mechanic versus a helicopter mechanic, there's way different of a person Like, I don't know, like you see groups or niche of people, and the helicopter mechanics are always kind of seen as the cowboys. But even more so if you're Part 91 or if you're like utility work. So for like forest fires or for heavy lifting, like those guys truly are like, living out of airstreams, chasing fires in the mountains. Like it's a different breed. We'll just say that. And sometimes that translates. But some of the mechanics that you're meeting have just come off of those contracts, and they got a dip in their lip like, what you mean you can't go take it up and go fly real quick? I'm going to go do the damn thing. And you're like, okay, hold on.
All right, hang on.
We have
Pump the
boxes.
brakes.
We have to check. We have people we have to call. So
That's awesome.
I enjoy it though, because I don't know, it's just it's a whole different realm. That's why every time that I see young people like trying to get into aviation and they're like, well, I don't know if I want to be a pilot, or, getting into maintenance school might be a thing for me. There's so many different pathways you can go with maintenance. So I always try to tell people, like, you can kind of take this and run whatever direction you want. Like, it's kind of crazy that our license allows us to work on airliners, helicopters, or hot air balloons. Like, it's crazy that, you have such a broad spectrum. But yeah, the camaraderie between helicopter people, especially maintainers and their crews, I feel like is usually pretty tight. And that's one thing I also really enjoy, is meeting all these different people and hearing their stories or where they came from in helicopter aviation. And even the medical side, like seeing all the training and things you guys have to go through, and where some people leave to go to or where they come from. Like, is I guess a question for you guys is being a helicopter flight nurse, is that like up there on a lot of people's aspiration lists, or you think?
I mean, I think it used to be. seems like we can't get butts in the seats anymore these days.
I know, right?
There
Yeah.
seems to be a shortage across the entire industry of clinicians, and so we're certainly working to change that. But yeah, it used to be a highly sought after job.
I don't know. You mentioned you could work on a hot air balloon, man. We could do a HEM EMS hot air balloon.
Don't
man.
be getting any ideas over there. No, but I think that it's it's, at least from my perspective, it's always nice having that camaraderie and that relationship there. And like I said before, I've always had good relationships with the mechanics at my bases, and that's been the fun part about it, getting to know them and what makes them tick, because it oftentimes is things that are very different than myself. But that's why we need people like that out there. And I think breaking down those barriers and having those open communications is something that definitely we can do industry wide that will certainly help improve our safety margins. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, understanding what you guys do in the helicopter is just, like I said. Just
But listen, I can easily teach you how to intubate. You do not want me trying to put a transmission back together.
Yeah.
Okay.
No.
There is no way you want that happening, I assure you.
We could teach you the
Yeah.
ventilator. It's not that
No
hard,
way.
right?
They would, I'd see you guys like, or all of my crew members like practicing. They had like the little mannequins and things in the corner, and I hear them, and it sounds like they're talking in code. Like when you guys are talking about like, oh, I need this or I need that, like equipment. And like, it's funny because they'll sometimes listen to me and other mechanics, and they're like, what does this acronym mean? Or what is that you were talking about? Or they see the helicopter in pieces, and they're like, I'm going to go back inside now because this, I'm going to have to get in this later.
100% my response. Yeah.
And I don't want to bother you. Like, you guys do your thing. You need to concentrate. I see a lot of pieces. I'll be like, all right, you know what? Time to go get some training done. Let me go stare at the computer for a bit. Let me get this done while I have time. We talked about this kind of recently, and it's kind of I don't know if it's becoming more of a hotter topic, but just something that we've kind of discussed a little bit more recently. And that's this relationship between what we call airworthiness versus mission readiness. I guess from the maintenance side of the house, Faith, is that something that you've heard people talk about?
And say it again, you said airworthiness, you cut out real quick.
Airworthiness versus mission readiness. Have you heard anybody say that?
I haven't heard mission ready. I mean, I know sometimes the helicopter can be airworthy, but it's not. Maybe the stretcher or some of the piece parts that you guys need to facilitate what you do isn't working. So while it's airworthy, it's not mission ready. Is that what you mean? Like it's like
yes,
kind of in limbo?
Yeah. And I guess why I bring that up was just from the maintenance, side of the house. I know from a med crew, we like all our things to work, and we're spoiled, right? I want my lights to work correctly. I would like for the air conditioner to be blowing the way that it's supposed to,
Cold air.
I know, cold air, right? Especially down here. for us, I can just speak of, does the helicopter have to have air conditioning to run?
Technically, no, but whole new game changer and another set of rules are all those lovely CAMES rules that we have to follow. And so I've gotten well acquainted with what those are and what they mean. It's funny because that's part of my job as an instructor, is to kind of explain why we do things the way we do. And a lot of guys are like, you can fly without air conditioning. And I'm like, yeah, but it's not for comfort. If we have someone having a heat stroke that needs to get to the hospital, like that does him no good. So sometimes putting what you guys need the helicopter to do into perspective for us also helps us make it make sense. But yeah, the helicopter could absolutely be what we deem airworthy, but it cannot take or lift patients. And that was something that was
take care of them.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was something that was bizarre that I'd never heard of, because one time I showed up at my hangar after my weekend, and pilot's sitting there, and it was a nice day. He was actually sitting there in a lawn chair reading a book. And I could just tell by everybody's demeanor that like their flight suits, like that, not that they weren't on, but I could tell when they're way more lax. And I'm like,
yeah,
are we out of service right now? And they're like, yeah. And they're like, they didn't call you? And I'm like, no. And they're like, oh, it's probably because they got parts on order. And so there's not much that can be done to the parts get here. And I think they were back ordered. And I'm like, oh, okay. I'm like, let me make some phone calls because I'm surprised. It might have a couple emails I haven't seen yet. So they were like, oh yeah, our litter system is moving when it shouldn't be. So something's up with the strut. So if we put a patient on it, it's not actually locking, it's rolling fore and aft. And I was like, yeah, that's not good. So the pilot was like, well, technically,
you should probably call someone to fix that.
I'm like, I did not know you. And they ordered parts, like I said, and I'm like, oh, I didn't even realize, just miscommunication. But like, oh, the parts won't even be there till tomorrow anyway. So I'm like, and the pilot's like, well, technically the base is out of service, but the aircraft is still airworthy and it's in service. And I'm like,
right,
that's so goofy. And he's like, oh yeah. And then I actually figured out that the parts folks had missed like an hour away that there was a strut to fix the aircraft there. And I said, well, hey, I'm like, instead of waiting till tomorrow, if this can still fly 91, can you fly me in the back seat over to pick up that part? And they're like, yeah, technically. But like, as long as you get a couple green lights and thumbs up, we could probably do that. So I called a couple people. I'm like, hey, instead of them sitting around for a day and a half not taking patients, I said, can I jump in the back? We go get this part, fly back and install it and do that versus a courier, because it was also Sunday. So I know the rate's going to be crazy and we're going to get nothing done. And they're yeah. And so they flew me in the aircraft part 91. Went, picked it up, came back, installed the part, and the base was back in service. And I'm like, man, this is weird.
Thank you to our sponsor, Metro Aviation. Metro Aviation, the world's largest family-owned aeromedical operator, offers comprehensive aircraft services with 140 plus aircraft in over 25 states. The Completion Center installs medical and law enforcement kits and avionics, serving diverse aviation needs including offshore, utility, VIP, and corporate sectors.
I've always just tried to make sure that I can communicate with the mechanic, like the things that we encounter, right? Like for those things, like you said, air conditioning, right? For CAMES, for all these other things, it's maybe we're particular, but we're also held to, these standards of, what we need to take care of our patients, and to be optimal and to meet what that patient's illness or injury could be, right? So I've always tried to make sure that we communicate, and then vice versa. So if they say, hey, this is just going to be MEL'd. Oh, okay. So we don't need that. And they're like, no, you're fine. And you're like, oh, might be a little bit hot, but it's okay. They're like, well, the fan works, so that's fine, So I think what I've always tried to stress and understand myself is really know those differences, right? What's airworthy versus mission ready. Trying to be open about, can it still fly? Well, sure. But are we really achieving our mission to take care of that patient and or maintaining the crew, right? COVID really threw us a lot of things. So I think we were in masks 24/7. We were in Tyvek suits over our flight suits, so trying to be creative and trying to find ways to decon, right? So trying to reduce crew fatigue. So air conditioning became pretty important for us, especially in the summer in Florida. I don't know, a flight suit plus a Tyvek suit over that and a float vest is really awesome, by the
Sounds
way.
absolutely awful.
But just those things that would like, and that was kind of a lot of where this really, I think, sparked in my mind, was really trying to learn these differences and just trying to hear from the maintenance side of the house. Be like, all right, listen, this may suck, but you can still do your mission. Is it optimal? But then we've also had those conversations with maintenance and our leadership to be like, can the aircraft fly? Sure. But is it in the best interest of the patient or the crew? Well, probably not. And then sometimes they're like, oh, well then let's make sure then, like you said, there was a better solution to, hey, let's just load Faith up. We'll go get the part, come back. We might be out of service for 4 hours, but it's better than another 14 hours, right? So I've always felt that line between airworthy and mission ready, being transparent and communicating just from the med crew side, the things that maybe we're just used to. And then hearing from you guys being like, nope, you can still fly. Might not be great, but you can still do it. But then for you guys to be like, well, why is it important? Oh, because of, it keeps the patient's temperature controlled, or we can power, this equipment that the patient's going to need. Oh, okay, then that makes sense. So I've always just felt being really open with that really maintains and keeps the aircraft running and the mission running smoothly.
In your guys' mission, it really puts into perspective, because you guys are a flying ambulance or a flying ICU, probably got way more. And so, it depends on what the helicopter is used for, right? So if it's used for utility work and the AC doesn't work, oh, we'll just take the doors off,
Sure.
we'll fly with the doors off and we'll get a nice breeze. It all depends on what you're trying to do. But you guys have so much equipment and stuff on board that has to do its job in order for you to do your job, that it's really interesting to see from the different markets that the helicopters are used in, how much or how little marginal error can really be there, because you guys need everything to function correctly. Like MVGs, that was something I was new to too, and it's crazy sometimes. Even when I meet other people that are in the helicopter world, I'm telling them, our MVG filter system was cracked and this was busted, or we were down a set of goggles, so we couldn't take patients at night. And a lot of people don't even realize, like, oh yeah, I guess you guys would have to have night vision goggles. Like they don't even, and I'm like, yeah, I didn't even think about it till I got into aviation, or until I got into EMS aviation specifically. But I'm like, well, yeah, how else the hell are you going to see where you're going? And it's pitch black, like, and how much more equipment that has to have on board, and what that means for us as mechanics, and understanding, what it does and doesn't do. Because unless you're EMS or you're a prior military, you're not using MVGs. There's hardly anything else that will.
Right.
A lot of times when the sun goes down, that's it for helicopter operations. So like tours and charter services, a lot of people, depending on where you are, a lot of them don't fly at night. Some will, just depends. Nothing that says that you can't rule or reg wise, but just, you guys know how many obstructions and things that sometimes are unmarked and things like that. And a lot of people don't care for that and all the things that come with. So, but yeah, for your guys' mission compared to other helicopter companies or operators, it's all got to be there. It's all got to work, or you got to have a backup. So definitely important.
Like, you talk through possibility of sometimes MELing stuff, or, that we're obviously a very particular bunch and that we need to have our things work when we need to have them work. Like, at what point do you end up, from a maintainer's perspective, saying, okay, well, this is something that I can't MEL. This is something that is going to ground the aircraft. This is something that really is going to put the base out of service. Like, how do you end up, is there that fine line of yes and no? Like, you're going down your check boxes here and you say, well, this, and this work, and this doesn't. So therefore you're SOL today and you're out of service. Like, how do you make that fine line of when it's something you can just MEL versus out of service versus fully operational?
The nice thing is usually your MEL is pretty cut and dry. So it'll say I gave the example of the searchlight. So it's will your searchlight turn on? Yes. Will it actually stow the way it needs to when it's landed? No. Okay, so here's what you need to do. And usually there's a what if flow chart that you can kind of go through. The wonderful thing about an MEL is that at the beginning of almost any MEL, it'll tell you, hey, while this does say you can MEL all of these different pages of these different items, if you feel that too many things have been MEL'd or it's going to appreciably affect the helicopter and its safetiness, you can also choose to not MEL something. So just because the MEL says that I can doesn't mean I have to. So, you know, if it says, hey, you can MEL the MVGs and, you know, you can only fly during the day and that's your restriction until you get that situated. But if for some reason, you know, I don't know, there's some underlying circumstances and there's smoke in the air and it's really dark out, there's an eclipse, I don't know, something weird. And you're like, hey, like it's dark all the time. And technically we can fly right now. That's probably where I'd be like, you know, we're not going to MEL this. You're grounded until this gets situated. So the MEL is meant to be a tool in your toolbox. It's not necessarily supposed to be like, we have to MEL this. That's the wonderful thing. And that's how a lot of companies will present it to mechanics and pilots is if you want to continue under these certain restrictions, you can, but you don't have to. A lot of times it's just kind of used to bide you some time until you can get that part. That's usually what people use it for, is just like an extension. Right. So,
Sure.
But yeah, if I get an aircraft and there's like 6 things MEL'd, that poor pilot's gonna have to remember all the restrictions that come with each one. And it's like, at that point, you can't do your job and fly it like you need to because you're trying to remember all the rules for all these limitations now. And that's not fair. You know, it's like driving a car and the windows won't go down, the radio doesn't work, AC doesn't work, and one headlight's and it's like, that's not fair.
Time for a new car.
Yeah. It's like,
Time for a new car.
I can fly, but should I?
Yeah.
That's another story. So.
Well, that's really cool to hear. Like I didn't really know.
Yeah. I wasn't aware of that whole process.
And I mean, I've heard that it can buy you that time to prevent you from being out of service. Yes, you can still do your mission until you can get that part. But I didn't know that you could really just be like, well, if it really affects the overall conditions of what the pilot has to remember to do. And if you have a few of those, yeah, I didn't know that you could just be like, you know what? No, don't. We're not going to do this. We're going to do it right. Get the parts, and then we'll wait till it's fixed. That's really good info to know.
Yeah. Yep.
So when you talked about what did you call your training, your annual training again?
Oh, recurrent.
You had an acronym. Recurrent, right? So when you guys do all your recurrent, and you said that's now more of your primary role is instructing other maintainers. So when you do yearly, like I know what I have to look forward to every year when I go to the SimX and HPS, you know, to do all this. So from the maintenance side of the house, when you do the recurrent trainings, do you have it all pre-scheduled? I know you said you try to hit some of the topics that might not do all the time. Do you have like parts of an aircraft you can utilize? Do you have something that they can practice on? Can you tell us a little bit about how that works for you guys and the recurrency?
There's me, myself, and there's 2 other instructors. And so my main job has been to teach for the last 2 years new hire. So I get the new guys. I have a decommissioned 206, Bell 206 that's just for me, and it's complete. So it's got blades, head, mast, transmission, engine, everything. And so a lot of my guys that get to my company maybe have been working on Chinooks or Blackhawks. A lot of them are prior service. And so they're like, okay, it's a helicopter, but it's a much smaller one. And I'm not familiar with Dell products. So we kind of baptize them and, you know, the 206 for 2 weeks and show them how to work on it and how AirVac wants them to sign things off and all those things. We also use that aircraft for recurrent. So those guys come up. It's usually scheduled a year in advance, so they'll know when they're coming up for next year. So they can look at that schedule and they'll know to try to get their maintenance done before, but someone will cover for them while they're in recurrent. But yeah, we hit on all types of different topics. So I'm also starting to co-teach recurrent. So this year I did a whole course over helmet maintenance. So that's something else that us mechanics are tasked with. Usually, not every entity will do it that way, but we take care of all of our helmet maintenance. And so a lot of the guys, that was one of my big gripes when I became a mechanic, is they're like, oh, you also take care of the helmets. And I'm like, I've never even had a helmet on my head. Like we use baby Clark's, like old school headsets.
Right.
And like what comes with this now? And so that was one of my gripes. So that's one of the fantastic things about my company is they're like, if you see a need, fill it. So I was like, I'm going to make helmet training. And they're like, yep, sounds great. So I've been teaching like a 3 or 4 hour segment. So all the guys, when they come back, they'll get me for just a chunk of the day. And I'll teach them like, here's all the manuals for the helmets. Here's some common things we're seeing. Like, here's how to track them, all this stuff. So we go over anything. It doesn't even have to be specific to the 206. Sometimes we'll go over my co-part. He's a really good Sparky. And so he gets these cool like little solder boards, and the guys do like circuitry practice. So there's like a little buzzer, and they'll have to like, mess with the different types of resistors and they do that. And then we just try to take input or get input from all the guys and say, okay, what are some things that you guys want to practice? Last year, we had a bunch of people say they want more practice with sheet metal working because it's not super common to do at the base level. Usually that gets done at the big facilities. So riveting and working with some of those projects, I think going forward, we're going to do that and maybe some composite work. So like resin and different structures that are on the aircraft that aren't exactly sheet metal. I know for me, it's been a long time since I've done anything like that. I've done some sheet metal work, but composite work, it's been since A&P school that I've had to do any of that. So looking forward to that kind of stuff too. But it's great that my company really puts a big interest into what the guys are wanting to learn and letting us kind of mold that into our courses for the following year. So I enjoy it and I learn quite a bit. And my co-part, he's been in aviation for a really long time, and he's been one of my mentors since I was really young. And so I'll even sit in on his class, and I'm like, they're like, aren't you an instructor? And I'm like, yeah, but he's like my helicopter grandpa. He's been doing this for like 40 years. So, I mean, you can learn from anybody. It doesn't matter their age. Like young guys too. I meet young guys that are like, oh, you don't know this trick? And I'm like, dude, where the hell were you 3 years ago? And so, but yeah, I love those classes. They provide a lot of perspective for the guys.
I love how you guys end up doing that training. And I think it helps to have that input from, the maintainers and soliciting them as to like, hey, what do we need to help you figure out here? Kind of give some buy-in to the whole process too.
Yeah,
that's pretty awesome. And I'm kind of curious to go along with that, like as part of training, the next generation of mechanics for your, company that's there. Are you seeing a lot of changes within the technology side of things, or are there any things that you're hearing are kind of on the horizon that are really going to change the way you maintain these helicopters in the future?
A lot of the newer makes and models, you can do quite a bit from a laptop now, right? So we can hook up and we can get fault codes, and cars have had forever where you can literally put a chip underneath your car and it'll read out and Bluetooth to your phone or to your computer all of the different fault codes or things that exist. And helicopters it was kind of a weird one that we were so late to the curve with that. Now they're starting to get on board and realize that, everything not being completely mechanically actuated, there's a lot of electrically actuated parts and pieces. It provides feedback. It's a lot more accurate, it's a little bit, not the troubleshooting
guessing game.
Yes. Yeah, literally. Like, it's like an O2 sensor saying, hey, hello, this is what's going on at this piece or point in the helicopter. And so being able to address it that much more quick. But that sometimes is where you'll get the kickback from the older guys that have flip phones, and they're like, I've never had to worry about a damn computer. And I'm like, it's okay. We're going to get through this together, Jim. It's okay, whoever. But yeah, I'm like, but that's the biggest learning curve. And I think the problem is just like you guys are seeing in your industry, we need pilots and we need mechanics so bad. And the only people that are currently doing it are those that have been doing it. So, the learning curve that we thought was going to be easy, because you hear all the older guys like, oh, those kids and their video games, this is all going to be so easy for them. And they're just going to get it, but it's like those kids aren't getting into aviation. So it's like so we've got the older guys coming out of retirement because they're like making twice what they were when they were my age. And they're like, oh, I'll fiddle around and work for an EMS company and, work 15, 20 hours a week on the slow weeks. And, I guess I'll learn the computer stuff because now they're like, well, I can't afford not to. And so, but yeah, there's definitely some advances being made there. And I feel like the bigger helicopters really have some of the really fancy systems like autopilot. And I was at the Heli Expo or Verticon, sorry, a couple weeks ago, and they did a demo, and I went on a larger, it was an Airbus, it was a 175, H-175, huge helicopter.
That is a huge helicopter.
Yeah.
Like, I've never been on anything that has wheels and can taxi like that. And so the pilots were literally demonstrating, and they're like, if you don't like the attitude of the aircraft, or, you know, something's not right, or you have an engine failure, there's literally a go around button. Like, the pilots were demonstrating, and they're both like up there, and it was funny because they both like looked back at us and like had their hands off the controls, and the helicopter leveled off and flew around. And I'm like, this is insane. And I'm like, that's just so crazy to see. Like, it's not autonomous, but you still got to have a meat servo in there, but they can do quite a bit without somebody, which is crazy.
I like that. I'm going to go refer to my pilots as a meat servo now.
Yeah. That's what they call themselves.
That is officially awesome. The new term.
That is so amazing. Faith, you need to trademark that.
Yes.
ASAP. That is so awesome.
Love it. That's great.
Man, that's pretty good. And I guess, you know, like when we talk about all these technology and all these advances, especially with AI, all this artificial intelligence, all the things that are coming out there, we're just seeing all these ways to train and do these things. I think it's incredible that your company, that you guys have a dedicated airframe, that these guys that you stated, you know, they're new hires, or whether you're doing recurrency, that now you just get to do it. And you get to put your hands on it. It's more than just reading a manual or going through a book of something, and you actually have this dedicated airframe to be able to do that. I think that's really awesome. I don't know if other companies do, but I'm sure, you know, somewhere I'm sure that probably exists. But I think that's pretty amazing that you guys offer that.
It's something that we've always wanted to have on the medical side of the house, to be able to have, even if it's just the skeleton of an aircraft, to be able to do all of the training for the skill sets that we may need to do in the back of the aircraft, so that it's not just like sitting around a table and doing it. We're actually practicing in the environment. And I feel like there's a few of those out there, but it's more of the rarity rather than the commonality.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's that aircraft sitting there. It's what almost all the new hire guys that come through say. They're like, oh my God, like this is just for us. And I'm like, yep. And I think it was actually kind of happenstance that we ended up with it, because I think what happened was it originally was supposed to go off to be refurbished, and the wait line was really long, and those instructors at the time were like, maybe they'll keep forgetting about it, and like it'll be a hangar queen for us. They saw how much value there was in it, because all the classes that came through went on and on and on. They're like, this is amazing. Most places don't have a dedicated airframe. Like, you should definitely look into keeping this. And it was a higher time aircraft anyway. And they were like, you know what? Yeah, we can probably find a way to kind of write this off and keep it here. And it'll be of use not just to the pilots, but maybe even the med crews, and especially the mechanics. That's been our biggest asset. And I'm like hoping, that we can get other piece parts for other airframes. But we have some stuff from an EC-135. We have an engine, we have a transmission, but we don't have a whole airframe. I would love to have a whole airframe for an Airbus product. I think that'd be great, but not there quite yet. So
yeah. Well, you know, I mean, there's new ones on the horizon. There's more, you know, you said you're in an H-175. I can't even imagine the size of that. You're in a 155, right, Mike?
Yes.
Yeah. So like
that's
two
huge.
Above that. Like, so I don't know, as these things are coming out, you know, maybe these companies can see the value still in these aircraft, right? That it can now be part of training and keeping the maintenance operation going. I think that's amazing.
Anything else then, Blake?
Oh, I think this has been such a great episode. I think we've covered a lot of topics, Faith, and I am so thankful that you agreed to be on here with us, just to kind of really hear, you know, it's more than just wrench on the aircraft and the med crew, you know, complaining about something that's not working. It really takes so much. And I think it really gives us a perspective of everything that that you all have to go through, and what your mindset is, and how your skill set is constantly being refined, just like ours is. And just like pilots, you know, just everybody else, the constant training just really shows, and that commitment is there, and that honestly, we can't do it without you. And so I think that this has been amazing, and it opened my eyes. I think meat servo is incredible. So I mean, it's amazing. That was perfect. So
All the pilots called themselves that. That wasn't the copyright of me. I wish I was smart enough to have thought of it, but
that
no,
was
all the
really
guys,
good,
I hear
though.
all older pilots or older mechanics. I just meet
They're
servo
meat.
anyway. So
I love it. Yeah, thank you so much, Faith. It's been a pleasure talking with you and working through some of these things and, getting your perspective from your side of the house. My brain just does not function in those ways. And so I really appreciate having the opportunity to be able to pick your brain a little bit and find out a little bit about what's going on the maintainer side of the house. So really appreciate you joining us. And it was an absolute pleasure.
yeah, thank you so much. I love doing these things and getting to talk with you guys and see what life is like on the inside of the helicopter and what you guys do. And thanks for giving us purpose and for breaking stuff for us to fix. So
We are your job security. That's
We
for
are.
sure.
We will
Exactly.
always have a place. We will always find a way to break stuff for you. Well, again, thank you to everybody that's tuning in. Thank you so much for listening. We thank you for your continued support of the Vertical Helicast platform and the Valor Flight Crew podcast. So with that, we thank you so much.
We'll see you next time.
See you guys.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Valor Flight Crew podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe to hear more stories that promote the personnel and equipment behind the missions in public safety aviation. Lastly, stand by for a message from our sponsors.
Thank you to our sponsor, Metro Aviation. Metro Aviation, the world's largest family-owned aeromedical operator, offers comprehensive aircraft services with 140 plus aircraft in over 25 states. The Completion Center installs medical and law enforcement kits and avionics, serving diverse aviation needs including offshore, utility, VIP, and corporate sectors.
Thanks to our sponsor, Airbus. Airbus provides the most efficient helicopter solutions to its customers who serve, protect, and save lives and safely carry passengers in demanding environments. Its civil and military helicopters are flying all over the world, making missions possible. Visit airbus.com for more information.
Well, that's a wrap on this episode of Maintaining the Mission. A huge thanks to Faith Ortega for sharing her knowledge, stories, and passion for the maintenance side of EMS aviation. It's clear that keeping these aircraft mission ready takes a ton of skill, dedication, and teamwork, and maintainers like Faith that are absolutely vital to the success of every flight. We've got more great conversations coming your way. We've got guests from all across the world of EMS, aviation, and pre-hospital care coming to you soon. To all our listeners, thanks so much for joining us for this conversation and your continued support of the Vertical Helicast platform. We'll catch you next time on the Valor Flight Crew podcast, where we continue to highlight the people and stories that make this industry great.